Hello and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. So today I've got 3 questions, right? One of them's a bit of a cop-out question, not going to lie to you guys. The footage in the background comes from Guild Wars Insider, and yeah, 2 of the questions were questions that I cut out of yesterday's episode and the day before that because they were getting a little bit longer. And the other question I'm going to answer right now is it's to do with that. I've had a lot of comments on these videos where people have been saying, oh, why are you cutting a question out? We don't mind it. I'll be more than happy to listen to a half-an-hour video of you. And that's really cool, and thanks very much, guys. But the main reason why I'm trying to keep the episode length down is that I'm planning on doing this every day, and I don't really want to stop doing this series, and there is an end to the amount of questions I could answer. There will be a point, and I'll hold my hands up right now, there will probably be a point, just because of the format of this show, where we end up covering ground I might have covered a while ago. Maybe with a fresh perspective, maybe something different will be the specific subject, but we'll be returning to certain topics. I don't want that to happen too quickly. I mean, there certainly is a hell of a lot to talk about with Guild Wars 2. I wouldn't have started this if I didn't feel like I could go a very long time talking about different topics on it. But there will be a point where there are less questions to talk about, and I'll feel like, oh, we've kind of mentioned this before, is it worth going back? So I'd rather, if I've already got a nice 10-minute episode out, not put out too many questions at once. This is also the reason why I talk a lot about my own personal opinion instead of just coming out with fact after fact after fact after fact, because I would run out very, very quickly. So that's kind of why I'm keeping it down to 10 minutes. I think it's a little bit more watchable at that rate anyway. So I hope you guys can understand that's just kind of what I'm hoping to go. Maybe in the future, when I make the decision that Guild Wars 2 Daily isn't going to be a questions and answers anymore, but maybe something else, we'll rush through a lot more. But that's kind of why I'm keeping it down. Hope you can understand. And yeah, what I'll do now is just take you over to the 2 questions I answered yesterday and the day before that were cut out. One of them's a very long one about mechanics, and one of them's a bit of a shorter one about the lore of the gods and whether they might possibly return to Tyria. So yeah, enjoy. So this question was asked by Jen Omega, who asks, why don't the gods return to Tyria? This could be a bit of a quick question, actually. Are they afraid that they would mess up and give too much power to the others or take too much away? Or do they just not care for it at all? Ah, another mystery. Yeah, maybe this should be the mystery episode. This is, the questions about the gods are really some of the best questions that you can look at. When you get really deep into Guild Wars lore, I tend to find that the most exciting things are mostly about the human pantheon, their gods, what's going on with them, because they were very much involved in Guild Wars 1's time. Then something quite significant happened in Nightfall, where they essentially tell the mortals, the humans that are living on Tyria, that they're going to take a step back, and that it's the mortals' job to take the world into their own hands. Which is quite funny, considering as soon as the gods do step back, the humans start to lose a lot of their dominion over the land, and then you come to Guild Wars 2's time, and they're kind of on their last legs, and they're taking the place of the ancient elven race that you usually see in most fantasy games. But that's kind of the story that the gods have left. They're not entirely gone. It does seem like humans have got some ability to channel with the gods. For example, human characters have got access to racial abilities that will be named after certain gods. So, for example, you can summon Balthazar's hounds, which are these dogs that come around with you. It's under scrutiny whether these hounds are actually being channeled directly from Balthazar, as if the god is still interacting with the humans in some way, or that it's just the humans have invented some magic and named it after their gods for respect, shall we say. We don't know just yet which of those scenarios it is, so it could very well be that the gods are pretty much done and dusted with the planet. The last thing we heard about the gods doing with the planet was Balthazar himself opening up this portal in Lion's Arch, as I mentioned before in one of these episodes. But since then, no, there's really not been that much. The question is, in Guild Wars 2, will we see the gods come back, as you're saying? And I'm not sure they will, not because it wouldn't work as a storyline. I think it would be a fantastic storyline if at some point the gods did come back and there was this whole story that they left because they were corrupt, or they had some big war or something that they had to fight and now they need the humans fight. So again, there's all kinds of storylines that ArenaNet could come up with as a reason why the gods would come back, but I'm not convinced that that plot will come forward just because Guild Wars 2 isn't about the humans anymore. Guild Wars 1 was. That was all you could play. It was all about the humans. It was all about the humans' gods. Guild Wars 2, there's lots of different races, and who's to say that ArenaNet are going to make a storyline so centric on the humans when the other races have got, maybe not as interesting because there's not been as much built up with them, but the other races have all got their own kinds of things, like the Norn with their spirits of the wild, or the Asura's beliefs in the eternal alchemy, where there are all these different belief systems and things going on. I can't imagine ArenaNet focusing so much on the humans. I mean, there will be a place, obviously, in a storyline like that. Say they release an expansion based all around that story. There would be a place for the other races, but it wouldn't feel so personal if you were playing as a Char trying to save another person's world hand in hand with the human gods. It just doesn't add up. So they might come back, but if they do, I'm scared it would only be as part of a side quest, in which case I really don't think that it would do enough justice to the story ArenaNet have kind of set up there. So if you ask me, I would actually rather they didn't come back. Not at least until Guild Wars becomes such a huge franchise they can have loads of spin-off games in different worlds and stuff, in which case maybe we can look at the gods more there. But for Guild Wars 2, it's definitely not written out of the story. They might come back. It's a big mystery. There's nothing been said why they would come back so far, and they haven't really made it entirely clear why the gods have left. We've just heard that the gods kind of view the humans as their children, and being the parents in this relationship, there's always a time where you have to step aside and let your children walk on their own, and that's what the gods are trying to do with the humans right now. Although the humans aren't walking on their own very well. I mean, we can see that much. So the last question was asked by the Lone Plant, who said, "This question is about endgame and reaching max level. The way I see it now, a character will have everything they can possibly do between levels 1 to 79. This includes all forms of PvP, PvE and character progression. The problem is that once you've reached level 80, the entire aspect of character progression goes away, and the only real progression you get is aesthetic, through gear. Beyond that, it's just more skills and abilities. The only real way I see ArenaNet handling something like this is if they give max-leveled characters exclusive content, which would contradict their philosophy so far about exclusive content. What should ArenaNet do about this? Because I won't feel special being level 80 running a dungeon if everyone else gets to do what I do when I worked for my position in the game. In short, what's special about being level 80? Well, it certainly does look like there probably will be some dungeons that are level 80 required, and of course to finish the actual main storyline, those are level 80 zones. So there is a point to getting to level 80, and that you'll be able to play in the more difficult areas. There are end game sections like Ore, where the game ends, that's all level 80 areas, so being level 80 gives you access to this stuff. There's been a lot of talk lately about how the sidekicking up has been removed. Some people have been saying that they didn't like it, and some people have been saying they have. And honestly, I'm in the camp where I like that the sidekicking up's been removed. I really do, because if you could just sidekick up to anywhere you want, then it removes so much importance from actually leveling up. A big part of RPGs is having some progression, something to work towards. And I feel like if we could just sidekick up wherever the hell we wanted to go, then that just undermines the whole point of it. Yes, when you were sidekicked up, you wouldn't be at maximum power, and you might not get the full benefit of traits and things like this. But the whole point of the sidekicking up system is so that you can play at some viable level in all areas of the content, in which case it wouldn't matter if you're missing out on a few traits or anything. They wouldn't be important to you. Yes, they might make things slightly easier, but at the end of the day it would be balanced. The whole idea of sidekicking up is that it would be balanced, that you could complete that content anyway, so there really wouldn't be much point. I do feel like the sidekicking up thing wasn't going to work very well. For the world versus world, which it does still work in, yes, I can see that. That makes perfect sense, because you do want to be able to compete on some form against other level 80 people. But for the PvE world, I've got to be honest, I'm happy that it's gone. So this is something special about being level 80, I suppose. This is the reason why we're going to keep playing the game. We want to continue playing through our personal story. We get engrossed in the world, we get engrossed in whatever storyline we've made. We've made certain decisions, we want to see how they pan out as we play through. And as we continue along, I presume there are going to be moments where we realise, damn, this mission's really hard, I can't quite complete the story step. So you go off, you level up, and then slowly it continues on, and you get further in your storyline, until eventually you end at level 80. So, really, in that respect, there is exclusive content for people at level 80, these PvE areas. I mean, it doesn't go much further than that, certainly, and we might have some dungeons that also are level 80 exclusive. Don't forget that although you'll be scaled down in various areas of the game, you still have some comparative level from your main level. So, a level 60 scaled down to level 20 will be weaker than a level 80 scaled down to level 20. It's only going to be slight, but of course when we're looking at endgame dungeons, that's something that people will want to consider. If you're going back to the Ascalon Catacombs as a level 80, then that's a position you hold over other people who aren't quite at max level yet, and you will probably be able to help out in the dungeon more than other people. Whether that's really going to be so significant that people are going to start choosing level 80s over level 20s, say, for certain dungeons, I'm not sure. I would hope it's not that significant, honestly, because I'd like grouping to remain easy in the game and free, and I'd rather people not be blamed blamed that they're doing badly in a dungeon because they haven't sunk enough hours into the game. That was never something that ArenaNet ever really believed in, but that is a perk of being level 80. Full-fledged features, no, there's not like a special type of PvP that becomes available at level 80, certainly not. So we do come to the question of, once you are level 80, what are you going to keep doing to play the game? I mean, this is a big question. End game in Guild Wars 2, what's it going to be like? Where they're going for purely cosmetic rewards rather than statistical things. I know you're not exactly asking, hey, I want statistical bonuses, why would I want to keep playing if I'm not getting them? But I think it's a pretty good segue into that topic anyway. I mean, this is the big question on a lot of people's minds. Will we want to keep playing? What else are we going to do once we're level 80? How are we as a level 80 special among other level 80s? I mean, we see this a lot. People are very concerned that, oh, there's no gear treadmill, what's going on here? How can I prove that I am the better player than you? What do I get for my efforts? What am I going to be working towards? I need these statistical bonuses. But do we really need more statistical bonuses when we're at level 80 to point out that we're different from other people? I don't really feel like you do. I feel like cosmetic things are enough to work towards when you're at level 80, so that you can say, haha, look, I'm better than you, I've managed to finish this super hard dungeon and I've finished it this amount of times, and look, now I've got this awesome gear to show off for it. Do we really need a statistical boost as well? Especially considering that Guild Wars 2 is going to be scaling you down, right, wherever you are anyway, so that you're appropriate for the content. What's the point in this statistical boost that makes you effectively, shall we say, level 81, while everyone else is still only level 80, because you did this super hard thing? What's the point in it when all of the content's going to be geared for level 80 anyway? So your stats will still be scaled down and it wouldn't make any difference. So I don't really think there's even a place for that kind of mechanic in Guild Wars 2. The whole idea, really, one of the key things they're trying to change is that there's not going to be a gear treadmill like this. And it is something quite big and something that can go wrong, because we can't deny how much MMOs of the past have relied on players continuing to play simply because they want that +1. The statistical bonus might be insignificant, but a lot of MMOs, the only reason you're still playing is because you're trapped into this mentality where you want to keep getting a little bit more stats, a little bit more stats. And can purely cosmetic rewards fill that role? Well, that's the question, isn't it, really? I see quite often, even in Guild Wars 1, which had the same philosophy, it was pretty much cosmetic stuff. I see all the time when you explain to people in that game, oh, there's some really good armour, it costs 100,000 gold, and they'll say, oh, wow, really? What does that get you? And you say, oh, you just look cooler. And there is disappointment there, that people do get a little bit disappointed by that. They like the idea of getting more stats, and the question is, will people really continue to be motivated to play if there is not that prospect there? Guild Wars 1, I suppose, is quite a good case study for that, and I don't think originally when ArenaNet were releasing Guild Wars 1, they thought that players would play that much. I mean, their whole original business model was that there wasn't going to be much of a PvE end game, that people would move to PvP or they would wait for the next standalone campaign to come out. The game didn't have a subscription fee, so really, they were happy if you stopped playing. If we're perfectly honest, they were happy because you weren't using up their server resources and you would probably come back and buy their next standalone thing. So this part of their philosophy, even though the Guild Wars 2 is a very, very different game, but this remains the same. I mean, are ArenaNet expecting to retain a large PvE community, or do they not care because they understand that these people aren't paying a subscription fee anyway and they don't mind if they've left? I would say that they do still care, because Guild Wars 2 is going to be a lot more reliant on microtransactions, which of course people will only be buying if they're still motivated to play. And I think, looking back to Guild Wars 1 as a case study as well, really, ArenaNet only adopted that original PvE, oh, there's not much endgame philosophy with the initial launch of the game. As more campaigns were released and time went on, there were a lot of patches that introduced quite a lot of endgame content to it. I mean, if you look at Nightfall and Eye of the North in particular, but I prefer Nightfall, you can see that they started adding all kinds of things that added more progression to the game for players and focusing on elite areas that were quite repeatable. Eye of the North in particular was built with the mindset that it would be a long time before Guild Wars 2, so Eye of the North has a lot of features in it that were designed to keep people playing. It had a lot of titles that increased your character's power, which a lot of people didn't actually agree with because it seemed to go against ArenaNet's initial philosophy of, you are good at the game because you have skill rather than how long you've played. But they added that kind of thing to keep people playing in a PvE endgame. Those were statistical bonuses that kept people in the game, and they did resort to that with Guild Wars 1, so why not with Guild Wars 2? I always quite liked what they did with Eye of the North, and I thought it was a good way to keep people playing the game. How in-depth ArenaNet's PvE endgame is going to have to be will, of course, depend on how long they're expecting the wait between expansions, but I'd say it's going to be at least a year. One of the big reasons why they even started working on a Guild Wars 2 rather than continuing Guild Wars 1 was because their original model of 6 months to develop a new game was not giving them enough time to do everything they wanted to do with their expansions and their new campaigns. So with Guild Wars 2 that will be changing, and I'm sure it will be at least a year before another expansion comes around, which means the players are going to have to be interested for at least a year, which is no mean feat. That's going to be quite difficult for them to do. There's going to have to be a lot of incentive for people to continue playing through the dungeons. I do think that cosmetic rewards are more than enough. You just need to make sure you have a lot of cosmetic rewards, and if needs be, make them very, very hard to get. At the end of the day, it's a win-win situation if you ask me. The harder the cosmetic reward is to get, the longer people are going to be playing to do it, and the more people will want it in the first place because it's just that much more prestigious anyway. Yes, if you're asking people to complete the same content over and over and over too much, things do get prone to feeling grindy. But I also think that with Guild Wars 2 and its combat and all the variation in there and how interesting the dungeons look, that players will have a much higher tolerance for repeating the same content as they might in other MMOs, simply because things can be so, and I hate the word actually, people throw it around so much, but things are more dynamic. You know, the reason why PvP doesn't get old even though you could be playing the same class on the same map constantly is because things change up so much, and because things can also now change up so much in PvE as well, hopefully players will be inclined to play through the same endgame content for longer than they might in other MMOs. But yeah, I mean, this is a big topic. I feel like I've kind of skirted around some points and not raised others, but I hope that kind of explains my opinion on it, and maybe we'll come back to it in a future date. Maybe once the game's launched, it will be very interesting to see what is actually going on there. But there you go, guys. Thanks very much for watching Guild Wars 2 Daily today. I know it was a little bit of a weird one, but please feel free to leave any questions you may have in the comment section down below, and we should be back to normal tomorrow. Thanks very much for watching, you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.